All right, so we've gone over 3 different explanations for why wages might differ between people with the exact same ability, which you can imagine would have pretty important implications for how much of the world works, because most people are in the labor market for most of their lives. It affects income distribution, because most people get most of their income from their labor, and also people's just general welfare, because again, people rely on the labor market for their general welfare. But these are only 3 of the explanations that we could cover. Right? We covered compensating differentials, labor unions, and discrimination. There are many more than that. We had the list earlier. Again, go take a labor economics course. There's a lot of fascinating stuff there. All right, some quick concept checks. 1, why do you think, why would we expect nicer jobs to offer lower wages? We tend to think, it's tempting to think of good things always going together. But I'm saying here that maybe a nicer job you might expect to get a lower wage than a less nice job. So what is the employer thinking in offering a lower wage? And why would the employee accept the lower wage? So let's start with the first one. Why would the employer offer a lower wage if they have a nicer job to offer? Yes.
More people are willing to do the job.
Yeah, more people are willing to do the job, right? We have labor demand, or say labor supply that's farther to the right. For the job that people want to do, it's really nice, and they're going to be willing to do it. So the employer will offer a lower wage, thinking that it will be accepted. Which very well is likely to be true as long as people are willing to take that trade-off. And then why would the employee accept it? They're being offered a lower wage. Why would they accept that lower wage? Go ahead.
The labor is more enjoyable.
Yeah, labor is more enjoyable, right? You're making your choice of what to do, not entirely based on the financial benefit, but based on all of the benefits that come along with it. And so, if a job offers you money and some sort of enjoyable environment, and that might be worth more to you than the more money option, as they might have as an alternative. All right, compare the labor market today to the labor market of 50 years ago. There's a lot more employer monopsony power. Remember, that is pricing power among the buyer side, meaning that they have a little bit more control there. There's just fewer employers around, and they're big. There's also way fewer unions. Man, I made this a concept check. This is a big old question. Yeah, this is like a term paper. I don't know why I made this concept check. All right, well, let's take it let's do a couple small pieces of this giant question. So we have more monopsony power, meaning there's more pricing power on the buyer's side here than there used to be. There's also way fewer unions, which means less pricing power on the producer side. Remember, unions are a form of pricing power. So with fewer unions, there's less pricing power on the supplier, the employee side. What would we expect this to do to wages? Let's just start with that.
Yeah. Lower wages.
Probably lower wages, right? Because think about what's happening. So we get less pricing power on the producer side. What happens with pricing power? You expect that prices are going to be higher if you have pricing power if you're a supplier. So if that pricing power goes away, then you'd expect prices to come down, wages to come down. Then on the employer side, you get more pricing power. There's more monopsony power. And so that's pricing power on the buyer side. And we didn't really cover this explicitly, but you can sort of guess what's going to happen, right? If you have monopsony power, if you have pricing power on the buyer side, that you're going to have the power to push the price downwards where you want it to be, which would also be pushing the wage down. All right, how about employment? What do we expect these changes might do to employment? Any thoughts there? It's a bit trickier, right? Let's do one of them at a time. Fewer unions. Let's just do that. So let's forget the monopsony power. Let's just say we've seen a decline in unions over time. What should that do to the level of employment? So so it could be less if what's going to happen is that we have lower wages and so people decide not to work anymore. But also we know what's happened with pricing power generally, which is that we end up with a lower quantity, right? So we have a pricing power model. So here's the profit maximizing point, right? And here is the point that you get to in a competitive market. So and we're talking about labor here. Here's the amount of labor with the pricing power. Here's the labor in the competitive market. We'd actually expect, based on that, if the pool of people who want to work stays the same, then you'd expect actually the decline of unions to lead to more employment, right? Because the union is going to say, hey, we're going to bargain for higher wages, all this additional benefits, safer work environment, et cetera, which also means that the employer is going to find it not worthwhile to hire quite as many people because doing so is more expensive than it used to be, right? We're moving down the demand curve here, which is going to lead to so we would expect that to be lower employment. Also on the monopsony power side, what do you think that's going to do to employment? And again, we didn't cover this, so you're sort of guessing here, but use that intuition. What do you think? So here's how pricing power works on the supplier side. How do you think they might use pricing power on the buyer side? All right, let's just do hands. I'm going to ask everybody to raise your hands for one or the other. Raise your hands if you think that the increased monopsony power is likely to mean more employment. Raise your hand for that. How about less employment? Yeah, probably less employment. So I'll give it away, right? How pricing power can work on the monopsony side. So you're right. If you have the ability to push prices down, right? Well, if you have the ability to push prices down as the buyer, here's where the competitive market would put you. But you will decide to make the price lower, maybe let's say here, right? And in doing so, you're going to get fewer workers, right? Because you're going to make the decision that, okay, it's more profitable for me to hire fewer people at a lower wage because hiring more people would require me to raise my wages. Nobody's willing to work for me at the super low wage, and I don't want to do that. It would mean I have to raise my wages on all my other workers, which I don't want to do. Which is the exact opposite of the story we have with monopolists, right? Why does a monopolist not lower their prices so that they can sell to everybody? Because that means they're going to have to lower their price on everybody else, which is going to mean less profit overall. Similarly here, the monopsonist wants to hire more people. They could profitably hire more people, but doing so would mean they'd have to raise their wage on everybody else, which would not be worth it. So both monopoly and monopsony lead to less quantity. So we would expect that increased monopsony power would lead to less employment. So you have these sort of two battling effects here, where this one suggests less employment, this one suggests more employment, although both of them suggest that the surplus there would be shifted away from employees and towards employers. But which one's going to win out? We end up with less or more employment. That one's not so clear. Same thing happening with efficiency. In general, the less pricing power you have on either side of the market, the more efficient things are going to be. With some exceptions, if you have pricing power on one side of the market, then more on the other can actually even things out a little bit. But here we have more pricing power on one side of the market, less on the other. And so again, which one's going to win out in terms of efficiency? Hard to tell. All right. Last concept check. We have some examples here, and we talked about different kinds of discrimination. We talked about taste-based discrimination and the different sources it can come from: the employer, the other employees, or the customers. We also talked about statistical discrimination. So think about what each of these would sort of slide into. So let's say there's an employer who will only hire people from his alma mater, the place where he went to college. What kind of discrimination do you think that would be? Yeah. Taste-based? Yeah, taste-based, right? He has a preference for people who went to the same college that he did, and then that'd be taste-based, and specifically on the part of the employer. All right, next one. An employer will not hire people from Seattle U because the last 3 Seattle U grads they hired were not very good. What kind of discrimination would this be? Statistical discrimination, right? They're making an assumption about what kind of worker quality Seattle U grads have based on what they think about that as a signal, right? And so they're applying that to other Seattle U grads, even if whether or not it applies to them, because that's the basis they have, the information they have to go. How about this last one? I can't get a job in anthropology because nobody wants to buy trendy clothes from me. What kind of discrimination would that be? Taste-based on the part of who? The customers, yeah. Yeah, all right. All right, any questions about any of this? Oh, yeah. Sure, yeah. I will tell you monopsony is not going to be like on the exam, but the definition of monopsony is when there's pricing power on the buyer side of market. So all the stuff we talked about, pricing power, barriers to entry, etc. Same thing applying, but on the buyer side of the market as opposed to the seller. some examples of this. So let's say that you want to be a rideshare driver. There's not that many companies you could work for, right? And so they have the ability to pay you a little bit less than maybe you would if it was a completely free market, because they have some pricing power. A good implication of this, by the way, and actually this is something that we're seeing effective right now. If you are ever offered a chance to start a business, and the way that that business works is that you have one person that you sell to, and they're the ones who help you set up the business, not a great business to get into. One example of that is trucking owner operators. They sell you a truck, you got to pay for the truck, and often they make you sign a contract that their trucking company is the only one you're going to work for, right? That's not being a business owner, that is being an employee who's taking all the risk. That's putting yourself in a situation where there's lots of monopsony power. They can pay you basically whatever they want because they have complete pricing power in the market, right? All you can do is walk away. That's the best that you can do in those cases.